get those guns down to Boston, that surely they would be able to win this siege. Knox went through fields, barren places, the snow and the ice, crossing 2 major rivers to get all the way to the Fort Ticonderoga. Picked up around 60 tons worth of guns and ammunition. And with sleds and horses and oxen and men, they began to carry the guns back. There were no bridges on the rivers. They had to wait until the rivers froze and froze solid enough to carry 60 tons of guns across those rivers. He finally made it back to Boston, and Washington used them to great success in the early year of 1776, placing some at the Dorchester Heights and some at other strategic places around Boston, luring some of the British out of their cover, beginning to fire upon them and upon the city as well. Lord Halifax boarded his ship and left, the Loyalists going with him, and Boston was reclaimed at the beginning of 1776. That became a major turning point in the Revolutionary War, that up to that point had been a dismal failure by most standards. It was a game changer. My cousin, Chris Elric, coaches football in Stroud, Oklahoma now. He's been coaching almost as long as I've been preaching, and we talk a lot about different things and mostly comparisons between coaching and preaching. But he says, when you're out on the field, there's nothing like a game changer. When things don't seem to be going your way, and then there's that fumble or that interception or that massive tackle, and all of a sudden the momentum shifts. It's a game changer. In 1989, that fall, we were playing in a game, Caddo against Fox, Oklahoma. 2 small schools that nobody cared about. Fox had won state championships. They were a good team. Caddo was even more forgotten about. We weren't a good team. We were expected to lose and lose dismally in this district game. I was a junior that year and played a middle linebacker. Every once in a while, the coach would say, "Hey, we're going to run a 6-man front." That means that I would leave the middle linebacker position and I would get down on the line as a defensive tackle, and I loved it. Loved every second of those plays. Early in the game, just a couple of minutes in, they'd had a fumble that they recovered for a major loss, and it just seemed like they kept going backwards and backwards until they were on about the 4-yard line. They handed off to a running back, and someone broke through the line, tackled him in the end zone. A safety. 2 points. Caddo went on to lose that game 42-2. What was amazing, though, was to see the excitement and the exuberance of a team, 2 points, against a team who was supposed to beat us, and it just seemed like, all the momentum was going our direction. The problem is that half the team realized, hey, we got 2 points on the board. We've got this one. We didn't. Game changers. Mighty Mo, as they call momentum. It's Mighty Mo. Mighty Mo is on our side. We look down through history and we see those moments which were game changers, where momentum shifts and things change. And we understand that sometimes after a game changer like that, you can still lose. So how can we keep game changers in our favor? How do we keep momentum moving with us? Because see, even in our spiritual lives, there are momentum shifts. There are massive steps that come in our lifetime that as Christians, we recognize, hey, momentum has shifted in my direction. For example, a spiritual game changer might be obeying the gospel. In Hebrews chapter 10, he refers back to the zeal of when you were first enlightened, the zeal of those days when you were first enlightened. It was a game changer for you. But what happens in Christianity sometimes? That zeal that is up here when we first obey the gospel, it peaks the crest, and what happens? It it begins to go down a little bit, doesn't it? And so we've got to find ways to get it to go back up and gain that zeal again. And there are other things that we might face that help that. Maybe a maturing in the faith. Sometimes you're living your life every single day, and you kind of look back and you realize, you know what? I'm a stronger Christian today than I was 4 months ago. Something happens in your life, and you think, I've made a great stride. I think that's a lot of way that Christianity is. We grow a little bit slow, and then every once in a while we make a rapid step forward. And sometimes we step on that step, and we look back and we say, I don't know what I was before, but I'm a Christian now. That's a momentum shift. Mighty Mo is in our favor. Or maybe you've fallen away, and you're down in the dumps, as it were, and then one day you wake up and you say, I know I need to get back into church. And so you come to church and you're restored. There's a game changer right there. There's a lot of zeal in that moment of that restoration. Or maybe it's you've decided, I've been bouncing along here, going to church, and every once in a while I'll do something, but I'm going to start teaching a Bible class. And so there's some new involvement that you've got involved in. Maybe it was, maybe it's not teaching a Bible class. Maybe it's leading worship services in some way, or maybe it's helping out with youth activities, or maybe it's whatever it may be in the church. But you start something new. And sometimes when we do that new service for God, there's a game changer there. There's that shift of momentum going in our favor. One for me is, it seems like, you kind of go along for a while, and then you've been studying with someone, and they obey the gospel. And there's a huge spike right there, just to see another convert. And a lot of times, that you're riding that spiritual high for a little while, and you're hoping to get that next convert, and if it doesn't come real soon, sometimes it begins to wane a little bit. And you're trying to find that way to keep that momentum going. Moments when you see a giant step in your personal walk with God, that's a shift. That's a game changer. When you endure a trial, and on the other end, you recognize that God has brought you through. Or maybe you've gone into a spiritual funk for a while, and you've kind of emerged from that. That's a game changer. The problem is that sometimes when we have those game-changing moments, we squander them. It's like a 2-point lead, and we think, we've got this in the bag. What happens is we can end up getting beat because we don't know how to capitalize on the momentum. This morning we looked at the feeding of the great multitude in Mark chapter 6, beginning in verse 30, going to about verse 44. That's a game-changer moment in a lot of ways. Mark, remember, is revealing that identity of Jesus, and now he's identified Jesus as the shepherd, as the good shepherd, as the shepherd that the nation needed in that moment. These people were like a sheep without a shepherd, it says, and now they have one. That's a game changer. A team that doesn't have a coach, and then the greatest coach steps on the field, that's momentum shift right there. And that crowd, even the disciples, are faced with, how do we keep things going? And then Jesus walks on water. The very next paragraph. What I find interesting about Mark chapter 6, beginning in verse 45, is that it kind of gives us some insight to how to deal with those game-changing moments in our spiritual lives. In Mark chapter 6, beginning in verse 45, it says, immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had taken leave of them, he went up on the mountain to pray. Something great had happened, and he doesn't discount the greatness of what had happened, the miracle that had taken place, the lives that were impacted by his teaching as he had compassion on them, taught them many things. But after a game changer, what I see in these two verses is that there is still work to do. Jesus told his disciples, get in the boat and go to the other side. We've still got preaching to do. Remember, they're riding that spiritual high of having gone on the limited commission. They're out there. They've been preaching and teaching and doing miracles and changing people's lives. And I can just imagine them coming back and, Jesus, you said we knocked on this one door, Jesus. And these people came to the door and they're like, what do you want? And we say, oh, we just want to teach you about the great king that has come and whatever. And they're telling their stories. They're sharing the stories. There's excitement there. And Jesus says, though, you've got to get in the boat and go the other side. Go to Bethsaida. Why? Because we still have preaching to do. If I could go back to 1989, watching those boys celebrate on the field after a 2-point safety, I would say there's still work to be done. You've got to stay on the field. Things can happen here where you can still lose this game. An early lead sometimes lulls us into a sense of security. But we need to not rest on our laurels. You know, that's one of those old sayings, been around forever. Don't rest on your laurels. Well, laurels were a wreath that was given to the victory of a race, In the Greek, it was referred to as the Stephanos, or the crown of victory, not the diademata, which was the crown of ruling or authority. This was the crown of victory, and it was made up of laurels, leaves and branches from a certain tree. The idea of resting on your laurels is to gain that victory and then try to ride that victory for the rest of your life. I have gained the victory in obeying the gospel, and I'm going to ride that victory for the rest of my life. It doesn't work that way. In Christianity, the game's not over until we die or until the coach comes and steps back on the field. And so every day is a new battle. Every day is a new opportunity to do what's right or to do what's wrong. And what we have to realize is that there is still work to do. In John chapter 6, which records the same events happening, the feeding of the multitude and the walking on the water, these two miracles together. The next day, the people come to him, remember, and they're seeking the food. And Jesus says in verse 27, do not labor, do not work for the food that perishes, but rather work for the food that is to eternal life. But notice what Jesus does not say. There's no more work to do. You're going to work. You've got to work. But don't work for the things that are perishing. Don't work hard on the things that are just going to be burned up, that are going to amount to nothing when it comes to your spiritual welfare. Rather, work for the food. Work for the things that will impact you spiritually and give you growth. But remember this, there is still work to be done. Jesus goes to the mountain, and what does he do? He begins praying. That's part of his work. Praying for the success of his ministry, praying for the safety of his disciples who are about to get caught in a storm. There's always work left to do. I'd love to say that any time we have one victory, that's all we've got to do, but we can't say that, can we? There's always people who are sick and need attention. There are people who are backsliding and need encouragement. There are people who are searching and need teaching. There's always great work to be done. So even though we may have had a great success in our spiritual lives or as a church, let's remember there's still work to be done. We've got to use the momentum and keep pushing toward heaven itself. Secondly, though, after a game changer, there is still an opponent on the field. There's still someone there to fight you. I was watching some videos the other day. One of those moments at a lull, you're kind of watching some YouTube things, they come up, and there was a soccer video. Unlike 1,000 other times, I didn't immediately swipe past it. But it was a penalty kick. And there's the guy, the goalie, he's out there and he's all ready. And there's the other guy, he's ready to kick, and he goes up and he kicks, and that goalie dives for it and hits that ball, and it goes straight up. He has blocked it, he jumps up, he runs away, and he's running across the field, and the ball came down with a forward spin, hit the ground, went right in the goal. They scored. That's a valid score. Here was a boy that thought that the enemy had left. There's no danger left. There's nothing left to face us. Notice what happens in verse 47. When the evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. You say, well, that's just the nature of wind. Wind can be against you at some times, yeah? But you remember when the wind was against them in chapter 5, Jesus rebuked it as if he were rebuking the evil spirits. Now, whether or not we can for sure say that the devil is causing this wind to blow, here's what I do know. They were faced with an opponent, whether a natural calamity or the devil himself, they're faced with an opponent. They're trying to get across the sea, and they can't get there. They're making headway painfully, it says. Why? Because there was still an enemy engaged with them. In other words, we cannot turn back or turn our back on the enemy. The enemy's still there. Remember, he's described as your adversary, the devil, in 1 Peter 5 and verse 8. He's as a roaring lion prancing about, seeking whom he may devour. The devil wants our demise. He wants your demise. He wants you to fall away. He wants you to forget God. He wants you to forsake God. And he is working at this very moment to distract you from heaven. And if you ever turn your back on him, he's got you. If you ever run away from the goal thinking, I've already blocked it, it's all over, there's still an enemy on the field. Well, when does the enemy go away? The first day of eternity. The first day of eternity, you don't have to worry about the devil anymore. But until then, understand the devil is still there. You remember Ephesians 6, beginning in verse 10, when he talks about putting on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil, right? These days, he refers to them as the evil day. The evil day is the day that we live on this earth. The days are against us. While we're on this earth, every day brings new challenges, new opportunities for us to give in to sin. They're evil days. They're against us. But we wrestle not against flesh and blood, right? Against principalities and powers and rulers of darkness and spiritual places. That's what we face. The enemy is still there. After a game changer, we need to understand that there is still the threat of fear itself. Notice, beginning in verse 49, he's come walking to them on water at the fourth watch of the night, walking on the sea. And he meant to pass them by, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they all thought it was a ghost and cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not fear." What were they? Terrified. You mean the disciples that had just taken up 12 basketfuls of fragments of leftover food, starting with 5 loaves and 2 fishes? They were afraid. The disciples who had cast out demons and preached Jesus in the region of Galilee, they were afraid. Yeah. In fact, it says they were terrified. They were beyond fear. Maybe it's because in this unknown moment, Jesus is walking on the water and people don't walk on water, so it must be a ghost. They're thinking. I suppose if I saw a ghost, I might be terrified, or if at least I thought I saw a ghost, I might be terrified. I think in this moment it's interesting because they're in the middle of a storm, the same sea that they were on in chapter 5. They know Jesus has the power to control the waves of the wind, right? But what's missing in this account? Jesus. He's not with them. You see, in the other one, he's asleep in the boat. But right now, He's not with them. I think sometimes we get frustrated. Jesus is not right here with me. I can't see him. I can't touch him and handle him the way the apostles did. And that's certainly when they began to lose their focus, is when they didn't have Jesus right there with them. But Jesus says what? Even now is not a time to be terrified. It's still me. I'm still here. If Jesus could speak to us, he would say, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of the world. Don't be afraid of their words. Don't be afraid of their attacks or their threats. Because I'm with you. And I'm bigger than all the world. That's the promise. God did not give us a spirit of fear, but one of power and love and self-control. 2 Timothy 1 and verse 7. We have a spirit of fierceness if we'll latch hold on it. Don't think that your heart cannot turn back to fear. Even when there's been a game changer, momentum shift, you think, well, I'm on the way now. Things can happen. And that momentum can drain away. Fear can set in, and self-defeat. The tragedy of it. After a game changer, we need to remember there is still the potential for us to give up. Look at the last two verses, 51 and 52. He got in the boat with them, and the wind ceased. And they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. Again, the apostles, the things that they've seen Jesus do and witnessed, the things that they themselves have done by the power of Jesus, their hearts are hardened. Why are they hardened? In Matthew's account, it says that they were even more afraid when they realized he was Jesus. Our fervency and desire to be victorious sometimes can be zapped in a moment, completely taken away from us. Momentum can shift many times in the game, right? Things can be going your way, and then they go against you. And then they go your way again, and then they go against you. The idea is we're trying to keep that momentum going in our direction and in our lifetimes as Christians. Sometimes we'll have those game changers and things are going great, and then sometimes that momentum will run out and it seems like all the world is against us. We're looking for that turnaround again. We want to coax Mighty Mo back on our side, move in the right direction. How do we capitalize on game changers? Well, we've got to recognize that we're still in the game. The opponent's still on the field. There's still work to be done. And if we will do that work, that we can be victorious. We need to combat fear in our lives, and we need to never give up. That is, we keep working, fanning the flame of a game changer. Never be satisfied with your spirituality as it is today. Determine now that tomorrow my spirit will be stronger. My attachment to Christ will be stronger. My love for him will be deeper. Never, never give up and be satisfied with your spirituality. And brethren, never underestimate the devil's zeal and tenacity. He has zeal that compares to the zeal of the greatest Christians in history. He has a stick-to-itiveness that rivals those who have stuck to their guns throughout history. The problem is, his zeal and his tenacity is to take us down. And God's zeal and God's tenacity is to lift us up. And what do they say? We cast the deciding vote. Will we be lifted by God or brought low by the devil? And that's where our zeal and our tenacity comes in. Tonight, maybe you have experienced a game changer, a momentum shift. And you're celebrating. Right now, you're riding high on that spiritual high, and that's a great thing. But one of the things we often talk about in invitations, if you're having troubles, if you're struggling, if things like that, come forward. But listen, if things are going great right now, respond to the invitation. Seek the prayers of your brothers and sisters that things will continue to go good and that you can turn this momentum shift into a great victory in the hereafter. Nothing wrong with that. Answer that invitation. If you're not a child of God and you've not experienced that first initial game-changing moment of obeying the gospel, all things are ready for you to do that tonight, to become his child. If you need to respond to his invitation this evening, won't you come while we stand and while we sing?